Good afternoon. Welcome to the February virtual road trip with AGE-u-cate Training Institute. And we're going to just let you all get in and get settled down before we get started. Thank you for joining us today. I hope wherever you are Zooming in from, you are safe and warm and comfortable. I am Zooming in from the Chicago area, as is Jeannine, and we've had quite a bit of snow here, but fortunately I see dripping icicles hanging from my, my roof, so hopefully things are going to kind of unwind with this dreadful cold we've had. All right, we'll wait another moment here, get a few more people in. All right, I'm going to get started so we stay on time. I welcome you to this February virtual road trip with AGE-u-cate Training Institute. We have a wonderful speaker today. I will introduce her in a moment. She will be talking about empathy, an essential yet elusive skill in dementia care. My name is Julie Boggess, and I am a certified master trainer with AGE-u-cate Training Institute, and I'm also the director of grants and consulting projects. I am sitting in today for my dear colleagues in Texas who are dealing with severe weather there with the snow and the ice and lots of electricity outages and no access to internet. So I'm happy to sit in today and facilitate this wonderful presentation by Jeannine Forrest. Let me tell you a little bit about AGE-u-cate. Some of you are frequent, stop in frequently on our virtual road trips, but just in case you are new to AGE-u-cate, AGE-u-cate was created in 2011 by founder Pam Brandon. And what we do is we develop innovative training for professional and family caregivers in the field of aging and dementia care. Our training transforms attitudes and actions. So what we are out there doing is trying to help caregivers who are caring for elders to think differently about how they go about their caregiving and to get them to incorporate our learning so that their actions are transformed. And it's all about improving quality of life and quality of care for older adults. Our flagship programs are Dementia Live, Compassionate Touch, Flashback, and we have newly partnered with a program that I am so very excited about. It's called Reading to Connect. We've also partnered with Ageless Grace, and I'm also happy to share with you today we have a new product coming into the market very soon called Reveal Aging, and it is a targeted curriculum for training caregivers working in caregiving environments such as assisted living, nursing communities, and so on. So if you want to stay updated on all of the activities and new things coming ahead with AGE-u-cate, please do sign up to receive our newsletter. And I have posted in the chat box our web address so you can sign up and receive our newsletter. So we hope you take advantage of that. I will be monitoring the chat feature through Jeannie's presentation, so feel free to chat in questions. And we are going to leave about 15-20 minutes at the end so that we have time to take your questions and have a little bit more conversation with Jeannie. So I'm going to introduce Jeannie. Jeannine Forrest offers guidance and education to family caregivers and organizations that are impacted by Alzheimer's disease and other dementias. For over 30 years, she's focused her clinical practice on education and research in the care of older adults with dementia, pain, and palliative end-of-life care. She served as faculty members at the University of Illinois Chicago and Rush University, and she's held board positions for the Illinois Hospice and Palliative Care Organization and Chicago End of Life Care Coalition. She's authored many journals and articles and books, book chapters on pain and geriatric related issues. And she holds a fellowship in the Institute of Medicine of Chicago. Jeannine also has her own company called Through the Forrest and provides care management and counseling for families who are journeying through the aging process with their loved ones. And she is also hosts on a regular basis a segment called Dementia Unplugged with the Dementia Society of America. So we are so honored to have Dr. Forrest today join us and enlighten us a little bit about this elusive topic of empathy in caregiving. So I'm going to turn it over to Jeannine, and again, welcome.
Well, thank you so much, Julie. I'm excited to be here. I want to thank Educate and a special call out to Pam and all of you who may be in Texas and who are checking in now, but who could not participate. So thoughts and prayers for comfort and safety, especially. So thank you again. And yes, let's talk about empathy, an essential yet elusive skill in dementia care. And the tagline is, can empathy be taught? Can it? I like to kind of start out and come up with a common definition about what empathy really is. One way to talk about this concept is that empathy is the ability to understand and share feelings of another from their point of view and not your own. I'm going to read that again. It's the ability to understand and share feelings of another from their point of view and not your own. That's very important, and that's going to play a significant role as we see how this relates to people with any form of dementia. Believe it or not, there are 3 types of empathy. So there's this sense that we have to dig deeper on what empathy really is. So one component is considered cognitive empathy, meaning it's the knowing, it's sort of the rational knowing about how another may be thinking. And if you're taking notes, I'm going to ask that you underscore the may, because none of us can ever truly know what another person is thinking or even feeling 100%. We can take perspective, but it's never fair to say, I know exactly how you feel. That's just never true. But when we talk about cognitive empathy, think about learning to take one's perspective. The other type of empathy is called emotional empathy. How many of you, when you looked at this picture of this person's hand with a skin tear being tended to, my automatic sort of response is, ouch, right? That is a connection on a visceral level, that you're able to really sort of feel different sensations and connect with similar experiences. Again, never totally being able to take that person's place, but there is some sense of this physical reaction. That said, does it ever get to a point when someone is physically hurted where we become numb, that emotional empathy becomes disconnected? So there's a way of tending to this wound in an empathic way. At the same time, we want to be able to function clearly. And at the same time, we want to not be able to balance not tending to this wound as if it was just sort of a task to do. So there's lots of different things to think about when we're talking about empathy. And the emotional piece plays a role. Another type of empathy is called compassionate empathy. You can think of the word compassion. The formula for compassionate empathy is that perspective taking, add the feelings, and then the other piece that's essential is that one is moved towards a helpful action. So one can be empathic, but if you fine tune it, if you do something to help that other person, that moves into the realm of compassion. So that may be a lot more than you really wanted to consider, but it's fascinating to look at the sort of the nomenclature and what we're really talking about here, because that's going to be an essential understanding when we talk about can it be taught or not. So what empathy is not? Certainly apathy is on the extreme end of the continuum, right? Where there's no connection, no feeling, no perspective taking. But I want to compare it.
Hey, Jeannie,
Yeah.
I'm gonna stop you here for a moment because I'm getting some chats in that saying that they cannot see your slides. Oh, okay, hold on. Chats are coming in now saying that they can see your slides. It just updated. I think what's happening, and this happens sometimes with Zoom, is that the slides don't move in real time for all of the participants. So I think that's what we're dealing with here, but at least I know that they are seeing your screen, but their slides may not be advancing at the same rate that you're talking. Somebody has asked, can we see the compassion slide again?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you.
So yeah, I'll keep monitoring this.
So
And people also want to know if they will be able to get a copy of this presentation, of the slide presentation.
Yes.
Okay.
So I'll do a quick review so you can at least see the pieces.
Yeah, it seems like people are getting caught up now. So
caught up. Well, this Zoom technology, Zoom gremlins, you just never know what's going to work and what doesn't. So all that said, this is the empathy where we're taking one's perspective. Okay. So sharing feelings of another from their point of view, not your own. The other piece is cognitive empathy, having the perspective. It's sort of the rationale, the reasoning, knowing how the other person may be feeling. And it's the may that's important here. The emotional empathy. Okay, so now hopefully most of you, if not all, are seeing this hand with a skin tear and it's being tended to. So if you are equipped with an emotional empathy, you're able to feel like, ouch, I better be careful. This could be painful. Or if one is not equipped with emotional empathy, it could be just, this is what I have to do. I have to clean up this wound and get over it, right? And then we talk about compassion. Compassion being the combination of perspective taking, feelings, and being moved towards sort of a helpful action. All right. Julie, are people okay now? Because I don't see.
I'm not getting any feedback in the chat indicating otherwise. So I think we're good now.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, we can see the slides. Good. Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Thumbs up if that's the case. Thank you, everyone on the other side. Okay, so now what empathy is not. I want to talk about sympathy because it's not the same thing. Empathy and sympathy are not the same at all. Sympathy is sort of your cognitive acknowledgement of something, maybe that's been distressing to another, but there's no real emotional connection. If any of you are familiar with Brene Brown's work, and I'm a real fan of hers, she's a PhD scholar, social worker who does a lot of work on vulnerability and shame and empathy. Needless to say, if you Google her, there's a YouTube video on the difference between sympathy and empathy. And I'll kind of give you a summary here. So sympathy is as if you're looking at someone in a dark hole, right? That person, let's say it's a neighbor who lost a spouse who died. And you're down there and you're kind of looking in, right? You're not in the hole with the person, but you're looking down saying, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for your loss. You know, thoughts and prayers, my condolences. Yes, it is, you know, it's the right thing to do. But in general, one does not feel that emotional connection, especially if you're on the other side receiving that type of acknowledgement. And there's a tendency to minimize when sympathy is in place. So an example, oh, you know, I'm sorry you lost your husband. And often the word at least comes into play. But at least you had a husband, right? Do you see the, you know, the juxtaposition of that? So, oh, I'm so sorry going through this. I'm so sorry. Your wife has Lewy body dementia, but at least you have a wife, right? So people try to put on a happier face, try to minimize sort of the gravity of the situation, often with good intention, but it's not always received well, or at least as well as you would like it. So there's a distance there. That said, sympathy does play a role. It's not reasonable to think that we're going to be empathic with every experience of others who's going through a difficult time. But I did want to have you know the difference between the two. So now with that background in mind, I want you to we're going to move towards the world of dementia. And how does this empathy, being empathic, play an essential role, I believe, and others, in dementia care? So just so we're on the same page in what I want to communicate, when we talk about the word dementia, it is really an umbrella term. Even like the word candy, there's many different types of candy, suckers, gumdrops, you name it, right? There are over 200 different reasons, etiologies, underlying conditions that are under this umbrella called dementia. And the most common that you're familiar, at least in the US, is Alzheimer's disease and Lewy body and frontotemporal and vascular disease. That said, what you see in order to have a diagnosis, part of the diagnosis of a dementia is there's progressive decline and at least two areas of brain functioning that affect daily life. And those cognitive functions include things like memory and the ability to communicate and attention and reasoning and judgment and visual perception. Unfortunately, many of the dementias have no cure and are terminal. So let's put this together. We are thinking of this concept of empathy and how does it relate when we are trying to communicate and respond to someone who has difficulty with memory or attention or reasoning or judgment. And it changes over time, right? There's a trajectory, a stage. This just happens to be Alzheimer's disease, but it's fairly accurate to say for most of the dementias is that we go from, you know, preclinical, not having any symptoms or presentation, to perhaps mild cognitive impairment, due to Alzheimer's disease, and mild, moderate, and severe. And as some of you on the call know or are learning, is that it's progressive. And when we're dealing with the brain, it controls not only cognitive function, but motor functions. I'd like to put a slide on here indicating what's happening inside your skull for people who are diagnosed with different dementias. So on the left side, we're looking at a brain with frontal temporal dementia. The brain to the right is full, the tissue is dense. This is a normal brain. If you look on the left, you're seeing a brain with very large vacuoles where the ventricles used to be. There's shrinkage of the tissue. On the other side, we have someone with Alzheimer's disease. We have a normal brain, very healthy, dense, spongy. On the right, we have someone with later stage dementia. The reason I do this is because it's important to note that people with their dementias aren't acting a certain way just to give you a hard time. There are structural and morphologic cellular changes that are taking place that make communication and response and reasoning, it certainly changes over time and can certainly be extremely diminished. So this is important background to have in your pocket, because when you think about in your own situation, if you're being empathic with another loved one and even a coworker or a friend, quite often you get this bi-directional, at least, response, right? That other person's paying attention or, might say thank you. And there's some gratitude for you taking the time and the effort to sit with them and listen to their story, right? And they might remember years later that you were empathic with them. All of that changes when we're dealing with someone with dementia. So you might be sitting there thinking, now, wait a minute, why is it essential then? If all these things are changing, why is empathy essential? Because what does remain is a structure in the brain called the amygdala. The amygdala is, if you're looking at the slide, is that highlighted sort of peachy bulbous structure. And that has little deterioration within a brain with various types of dementia, thank heavens. We've, hippocampus, for example, our recording button of taking information in and moving it into midbrain to store memories, that dissolves. That's why people ask the same question over and over again. But the amygdala, thank heavens, stays for the most part intact. And the amygdala is responsible for emotional processing. And it goes across the continuum. It's a primitive part of our brain. So it's responsible for fight or flight, anxiety. And you've seen this heightened if you work or care for someone with dementia, because quite often they're afraid of anyone leaving the room, afraid of being alone, become easily anxious because there's all sorts of stimuli coming in that doesn't make sense. But the good news here, it is also can absorb and process joy and feeling love and connection and trust. I'll say that again, the amygdala can still feel joy, love, connection, and trust. And that's the part that we're going to be working with, talking about ability-based care, right? Person-centered care. All of that is, believe it or not, we are funneling all our efforts towards the amygdala. So a person with dementia, any one of them, can still receive and feel love, right? They can still feel it. Thank goodness. That said, the unfortunate and sad part is that over time, people lose the ability to give or communicate their love and appreciation. Doesn't mean it's not there, but they don't have the frontal cortex and the part of the rational brain that can say, oh, thank you. And this is where empathy becomes even more challenging, but essential, because the caregiver, the care provider, the care partner is constantly, if you're doing it well, giving, right? Being empathic towards. What's hard is when you don't get the thank yous, or if, the grandmother in my private practice, grandma never asks about us anymore, right? My dad doesn't ask about me anymore. Never says thank you. It's all about themselves. And so that's what makes empathy an important strategy for people who are caring for someone. We can't expect the person with the dementia to return it. It can happen once in a blue moon. So be grateful if it does and when it does, but there should not be that type of expectation. So with all those cognitive changes taking place, the way I like to describe this is that people move from, sort of a cognitive, hyper-cognitive reasoning ability when their brains are intact, and move much more towards an emotional and sensory level. That's the operating system, the emotional and sensory level. And so we have to hang on to that and not spend our time trying to convince or cajole or, get angry with someone who won't do it, right? Why doesn't my mother understand that she needs to take a shower, right? Well, that's because that part of the brain, that's why I showed those slides of the brains really being, sort of changing morphologically. That's no longer there. So let's work with what does. So that's, I hope, a segue into showing the importance of how we now need to take on the person with the dementia's point of view to our best ability, knowing we'll never be able to do that 100%, right? I love this picture by Magritte. We're trying to tap into their world and operate from their point of view, knowing that their ability to rationalize is diminished. Sensory abilities are changing. So, vision becomes much more tunnel vision. Add to that any hallucination that might occur, that really creates a real challenge. But it is this skill called empathy that can tap into real connection and trust. And it allows, in my, personal experience as a family caregiver, and my professional experience as a, I coach family caregivers and, healthcare providers on how to do this. It's a way of gaining additional cooperation. I never want to use this as a manipulative, tool. That's not okay. But I know that I can tap in quite often to someone's, and I don't usually say I'm going to tap into your amygdala, but what I do is connect, and so that we can have shared experience. And at the same time, moments of joy are possible. Okay, let me give you an example, not so theoretical. How many of you are looking at this scary picture of these kids staring just blankly? Well, one of my clients was a woman with Lewy body dementia. And within her hallucinations, excuse me, she had two very distinct hallucinations, which is a hallmark of Lewy body dementia. One was that there were little green men that would move outside her window. She could describe them in incredible detail, and they were there every time I would make a home visit. But they were not frightening at all to her. They were here. Do you see the little green men? And so one way of being empathic about that is, oh, tell me about the little green men. Oh, I can see that you see those little green men, right? It would not be helpful for me to say, oh, what do you mean there's no little green men out there? Or, you know, of course there's no little green men. That would not have created any kind of connection between the two of us. What was scary to her was the hallucination that there were little children who would just stare at her, who were in her apartment and not say a word. That was frightening to her. And using the same kind of empathic response, but differently, knowing that this was wow, okay, you know, Miriam, I'm going to stay here with you. I'm going to escort these children out of the room. I'm going to, you know, look around, make sure you're safe. You're safe with me. Nothing's going to happen with me here. And so I connected to her emotional tone and the scariness, right? It was very real to her. So I was taking her perspective, even though it made no sense. There were certainly not children there, but it was important to connect that way. And her anxiety dropped drastically. Another example, very common, I was just coaching a couple who brought in their mother-in-law to live with them, and the mom didn't want to take a shower. And so it was the son who was doing the showering. And just didn't understand why mom wouldn't take a shower because she smelled and all those things. Right? So when I worked with him to see it from her point of view, in terms of privacy, in terms of feeling naked in front of someone, especially a man, and in her time traveling, she thought, excuse me, he was a kid from the past. So we did all sorts of things to make sure she was covered and warm and, excuse me, and that, you know, they had a bond before, that she felt trustful before, you know, he even talked about cleaning up. Excuse me, don't you love live programs here? Okay. I love this quote by Maya Angelou. People will forget what you said. People will forget what you did. But people will never forget how you made them feel. This is particularly true for people with dementia because they're dealing in the feeling sensory realm. So yeah, they may forget what you said 5 minutes ago or what you did 5 minutes ago, right? But they will not forget how you made them feel. They may not be able to articulate how they feel because language skills change, but you see it in demeanor. You see it in tone of voice. You see it in the way they cooperate or not, or smile or not. I don't know if this happens to you, but if I've ever, you know, go to see my clients and I'm having a rough day and I walk in and they say, Jeannie, how you doing? And I'll say, oh, I'm fine. Well, they call me on it right away. No, you're not. You're not okay. There's no fooling people with dementia. They can tap into that. And I think that's a, you know, if I'm going to look at this, a gift of having dementia is that you get so real right away. You cut through all the niceties and you connect on this emotional level. another picture by Magritte. I'm not going to say it in French, but it says, "This is not a pipe," when in fact, visually it is. So imagine being in a world where object recognition changes, right? I might have a toothbrush in front of me, but not know what it's for. I have a fork in front of me, don't know how to eat. Empathy, perspective taking helps that bridge. So I'm not dealing on a rational level. So I don't get upset or angry if I say, let's, brush your teeth, and you don't even know how to pick up the toothbrush, right? So it's a bridge. It's a bridge into someone's world so that one becomes less judgmental, because I'm not expecting someone to work in this rational realm. And what happens when empathy is not present? I'd love to hear your stories. But for me, what I see is if I'm not connecting, if I'm dismissing someone, there's increased anxiety, increased resistance, agitation. Certainly, there's a higher use of anxiolytics and antipsychotics because we want someone to be and act the same way, right? Even though their brain is changing, when in fact the onus is on us, the people with the intact hippocampus and the rest of our cognitive structures. And so there's positive outcomes to learning how to be empathic. So the big question, can empathy be taught? And I say a resounding yes. There's evidence. It's not just me making this up. Medical schools are looking at empathy skills and training. There's a fairly new paper that has a systematic review out of Florida looking at enhancing empathy for people, person-centered care for people with dementia. So I'll let you read that at your own pace if you're interested. So there's recognition that empathy is important and can be taught. However, there are limitations. It's not the end all be all. I'm not Pollyanna about this. It's not easy to sustain. This is what I'm finding in medical school. They can teach it, but there needs to be more to sustain empathy, especially in professional caregivers. I find it's because we're dealing in a world of body language. Masks make it a little more difficult, and we're dealing with humans. So when we're talking about teaching empathy, I'm just going to kind of give you a little overview. Some of the key elements to consider are, it has to be a commitment. This is intentional. It cannot be haphazard. It takes energy to be empathic. We have to have what I call congruency between body language, tone of voice, word choice. Although we communicate heavily, primarily through body language and tone of voice, the words we use, right, can bring someone up or put them down. So do I say, well, let's change your diaper, Mom, right? How might that make me feel as an adult woman if I was listening to that? So the words we use, even using the word demented, please don't say someone's demented. I know it's still in the literature, but it's always a person with dementia. I would never say this person is cancered. So how we use words to describe someone can lift them up or not. I even avoid saying someone's diabetic or hypertensive or any of that. It's a person with diabetes. It's a person with hypertension. So being a little more fine-tuned in how you use your words, knowing the person's preferences, affirming affirmation. If you're working with a team of people and you're expecting some empathy in order to be a care provider, you have to give, that was really great the way you interacted with, Mrs. So-and-so. At the same time, boundaries are important. So you can't get so far in the hole where you're absorbing everyone else's pain and problems. So that's why it needs to be taught. Some people are more intuitive, but empathy does require some skill building. And what I like to tell families, especially couples, because you can get into, I've seen some marriages really almost dissolve when their loved one has dementia, is the goal is not to be right, but to learn how to love well. So if you're trying to convince someone that the sky is blue when they're saying it's green, let it, it's a beautiful color. So the goal is not to be right when you're caring for someone with dementia, but to learn for them to feel loved. All right, a few more thoughts as we get to a close here, and then I know we have questions. So what does it take to sustain the ability to be empathic? Energy. And that's why there's some limitations. We're dealing with people who are super stressed. Add the pandemic on top of this, wow. Add short staffing, wow. So this whole idea of self-care, the care and keeping of you becomes essential. It's the idea that you put the person first before the task, right? Person-centered care. A culture that values empathy. And it really has to be a whole culture if we're dealing with care organizations. And they have to be empathic to their care providers. Right? Understanding your limits when you need just a mental break, that this may not be, the end all be all, one technique fits all. It takes practice. Why is it elusive? Why do I say elusive? Because we're human, because it's not something you can just turn on and off. It does take intention. It's helpful to have had empathic experiences so you can tap into that well. It's very easy to forget if you're stressed and rushed for time and feel it. But there's ways of teaching people that it actually creates less time. If you're gaining cooperation through trust, you're not dealing with the agitation and all the resistance. And another piece is grief, especially for family caregivers. Their grieving often can present itself as anger or resentment. So I'm going to kind of end with a quote from Brené Brown. I think captures empathy quite well. Empathy is simply listening, holding space, withholding judgment, emotionally connecting and communicating that incredibly healing message of "you're not alone" by Brené Brown. So for those who are listening and interested, if you would like more information, one-to-one coaching on how to build empathic skills. I work with family caregivers. That's my dementia coach on call. So I have a company, an LLC that does business as through the Forrest. And a service is called Dementia Coach on Call. And so I work, typically in pairs, one family sometimes at a time, to teach how to communicate differently, to be empathic. And it really does, I've seen just sort of amazing results and satisfaction and love that comes back into the relationship. So Dementia Coach on Call. And then, wait, there's more. One last resource I want you to know about. This is my partner in crime in my LLC. It's Dr. Laura Lee Larson. She teaches emotional intelligence, which is it's connected to empathy. This is all of Daniel Goleman's work. How to develop leadership building and skills within an organization, because empathy is part of it, but it's sort of self and other awareness in order to really make leadership teams thrive. And so it's a natural partnership, I think, if any of you on the call within your organizations feel like you need, sort of a different way of working together so that you're thriving, not just surviving. Wow, that's a lot. Okay, so I am going to open it up for questions.
Great. Jeannie, thank you so much. We have a question in the chat, and it's actually the first thing that was on my mind as well, in terms of having a little bit more discussion about this dilemma that many of us who work in aging services organizations deal with. And I think back to oftentimes that we will refer to some staff as like, they just get it.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's a lot of staff that just don't get it. They don't know how to incorporate an empathetic approach to their care. And so one of the questions is, how do we get the staff to buy into this? How do we get them to buy into empathy as a form of communication when they are always so task focused?
So this speaks to a couple things. I think you need to, it's role modeling. People have to see it, right? And feel it, because we're all dealing with our own amygdalas. So it's not a cognitive, well, this is a skill you should learn. This requires very experiential learning. And so I think that's important. I think we kind of label people as not getting it, but they, who knows, are they seeing empathy in other ways, right? And are they routinely seeing perhaps the leadership providing empathy? I think that is very, very important. So that's number one. You never know what people are going through in their own lives, and if they don't have the the resource, the energy, never know what kind of homes people are living in, especially in this pandemic. And so that's where it's not just sort of a one and done. Here's empathy, and you're done. I think this is kind of an ongoing coaching. An ongoing understanding and checking in. How you doing today, right? So that people feel connected to as a human being versus just what they're expected to do or perform. People need to, I say you can't pour out of an empty pitcher. That may be something you've said, Julie, in the past, or someone has, right? So if they don't feel this wealth of being cared for, it's hard to show that to other people. So within the work environment, one of the things I'll, if I'm working with a group is, what do your managers do to make you feel cared for and loved? Or give me an example of when you've last felt cared for and loved. And if they don't have it, I have to put the onus on the leadership. Not 100%, but I think that's where it's a culture of empathy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that. I think you hit on two key things. One is sometimes the caregiving workforce don't come from environments where they have themselves experienced empathy coming their way. And then the second is if the culture of the organization doesn't support an empathetic culture, and it does need to begin with how those organizations interact with their employees. But in terms of being able to actually teach empathy to employees, what I heard you say is that it really needs to be role modeled. And sometimes it's maybe just that just in time type of training, where it's that conversation. How could you have handled that situation differently with this particular resident? Let's talk about that. There has to be a lot of conversation ongoing, like you said, energy, commitment to it. And that is a hard thing to sustain sometimes.
It is. That's why it's elusive, but I think it's worth it no matter how hard it is. Because what's the result when we don't? And we see the awful things
Yeah.
that happen when it doesn't happen. So
Yes.
it is like, okay, let's put our energy into moving forward with this. And so, yes, the real time. Also, there can be times when you do sort of a review. So outside the situation, but at a separate time, let's sit down and talk for a few minutes. Or this is what I do. I'll say, let's talk about the scenario. What happened? What could have gone differently? How were you feeling in the moment? What happened before you walked into work, right?
Mhm.
And so that also requires, for some people that I do teach sort of meditation skills or mindfulness or other ways of deep breathing. So it's not as easy, it's not just something that's quick, one and done. It really does take cultivation. But once
Yes.
it does, it's really cool.
Yes, I agree. I think what you also mentioned, what happens if we don't do this? We are going to kind of languish, I think, in this culture of that we've been experiencing in aging services. And we need to redevelop this workforce. And that's an issue that is very important for AGE-u-cate. And we're going to be focusing on tools and resources in the very, very near future to help organizations rebuild this resident person directed culture of care. And a lot of the fear is that COVID has just pretty much stopped in the tracks, any ability to really do any kind of workforce development. But obviously our hope is that, we can get back to some sense of normalcy and get back to this. But empathy, I think, is going to be needing to be at the top of the list in terms of training and outreach. It's just a skill that really does need to be taught.
Yeah, Dr. Larson talks about people don't leave jobs because of the work. They leave it mostly because of the managers.
Mm-hmm.
That's often they're not feeling appreciated. And that doesn't always mean more money, right? So, so I think you get it. Yeah.
But I also think somebody who is not perhaps in a leadership position themselves, let's say a activities director or a social worker, anybody can be a change agent in their organization.
Absolutely.
And they can start the process. And I think that's what is important, that we don't feel like this is so unattainable that I can't make a difference. It really does need to start and can start with one person.
Yeah.
So role playing, somebody chatted in, teaching and coaching in the moment is important. And having that dialogue with your care team members.
Absolutely. It's Amanda Gordon's poem, if you can't see the light, be the light, right?
Yes.
And so I just love that. So yes, it's doable. It's not this insurmountable challenge. It takes work and energy, but it is doable.
It does take work and energy, I think, which has been in very short supply right now, frankly, because of the struggles with COVID. I'm also just opened up the Q&A box, which I'm glad I did. And so there's a couple questions here. Do you find that when a person with dementia has positive emotion following an empathic interaction, that it lingers beyond the memory of the event? So in other words, if there's an empathic intervention, that it's not just done and done, that there's a lingering.
I'm so glad whoever asked that question. There's actually PET scans that prove that. That a positive interaction, and they have this lit up amygdala and different structures around it that light up positively, and the person's more calm, right? The opposite is true. If someone has a negative interaction, that bad mood can ripple and stay for quite a long time. You see this if someone struggles and is challenged taking a shower in the morning. And then it has a ripple effect to every other resident in that room too, right? So amygdalas are picking up on each other. And so people even ask, well, why bother visiting, right? I get this question. Well, it makes a difference on how you visit and if it's a positive one. And so it means everything. She may not remember later, he may not remember 20 minutes, but it means everything now, and it could set the tone for at least 4 hours.
That's good. And Megan also chatted in more of a comment. What we need to do is try to help the caregivers see that the outcome of their empathy, and they need to be able to see what that outcome looks like and how the recipient reacts. And so, you know, with so many things related to training in this industry, we have to let the caregivers know what's in it for them. Look, if you do this, then your work experience is going to be more rewarding. It may not be less difficult, but it will be a more rewarding experience. Another comment here, is there a training for large groups available, empathy refreshers, maybe for staff meetings, etc.? Also, any training material available in Spanish?
Well, that's great. You know, in my own private practice, so what I do is I do the empathy training sort of more one-to-one, but I was going to ask the group if that was something that people were interested in. I would be happy to create some workshops for larger groups, but not super large, not super large. I mean, so it might have to be divided, because you don't want a sea of 200 people, because it does take that innate feeling, right? You don't want to feel lost in this sea of Zoom at this point in time. So I have to be able to have a circle of care that people could feel my energy and my care for you to make this really work well. So it may be a series. So that's number one. There is a psychiatrist out of Harvard that works with, who does empathy trainings. It's called what's it called? Empathics or something to that effect. So there are training for, you know, they do it for medical students, I think other healthcare professionals, but I honestly don't know if there's other trainings that do this, and I'd be happy to take this on if there's an interest. So please get back to me, and you have my information. I'd be happy to start crafting that for you.
Jeannine, would you just go ahead and state your email address, and I'm going to type it in the chat here for the Q&A.
So it's my email is Jeannine, my formal name, JEANNINE at Dementia Coach on Call, all one word, .com.
Okay, I just chatted that in. Great. Also, in response to that question about teaching empathy, I do want to just put in the conversation that AGE-u-cate bases our programs on transforming attitudes and actions, and we do a lot around this issue of empathy. So 2 of our programs that are empathy-based training is Compassionate Touch and Dementia Live. So I've also chatted my contact information as well in the Q&A, and I'll put it here as well. So we do have the ability to bring those programs to your communities as well. So thank you so much. We have a comment. Thank you so much. Good session. We are right at 2 o'clock. So I want to thank you, Jeannie. Wonderful to hear your words of wisdom and inspire us to continue to think about moving forward Now that COVID cloud is hopefully lifting, we can kind of get back to the business of person-centered care. So thank you for helping us get on that road. And I'm going to also chat the information in the chat box in addition to the Q&A so that
Wonderful.
you can reach directly Jeannie or myself. So thank you so much, Jeannie. Thanks everybody
My
for
pleasure.
joining.
Thanks everyone.
Take good care.
Take good care. Bye.
Bye-bye. At Dementia Coach on call.com, right?
Yes.
Okay, there we go. I put that in the chat for everybody.
Wonderful. All right, I'm going to leave.